Hello, I'm here with Dr. Gary Hobson, who's a professor of English here at the University of Oklahoma. He teaches American Indian literature, and he's an author of several books about which we'll get to talk here in a second. See you, Gary.
See you.
Thanks for coming. I sure appreciate it. Well, I wonder if we could start at the start. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're coming from and how you wound up here?
Okay. Well, I'm originally from Arkansas, the Delta country. I went into the Marine Corps when I was 17. And then after that, I went to Phoenix College in Arizona State, and I've been slowly working east since then to New Mexico, and then to University of New Mexico. I got my doctorate, then to the University of Oklahoma. So making it eastward.
Yeah, good. How long have you been here?
25 years.
That's a pretty good stretch.
Yep.
And you're Cherokee and Quapaw, is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I thought we might talk a little bit about is some of your early work. The first thing you published was a collection of poems, is that right?
No, anthology was actually first.
Okay.
An anthology called The Remembered Earth, an anthology of contemporary Native American literature.
And this was one of the first of its kind, as I understand. Is that right?
I think in terms of bulk, it was one of the big ones.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them come out before. There would be about 5, maybe 10 authors, and I have 75. So I just wanted to make it. And I have, first time, from Mexico and also Canada in that anthology. I saw Indian literatures more than just the 50 states.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I didn't publish the book of poems until 1990, the deer hunting and other poems. But I'd published in a lot of journals up until that time.
Okay, I gotcha. That one's not an easy one to come by,
Yeah.
People ought to head to their libraries and get a look at it. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then your next book was The Last of the Ofos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, I started writing that back in the 70s and as a short story, and I wrote a couple of pages of it, and I had the voice right in the way I wanted it, but I just couldn't quite decide on what I wanted to do with it. I had many episodes I wanted to use in the story, and the next thing you know, it was starting to become a novel. And I was talking to my friend Linda Hogan, a Chickasaw writer. She at that time was having an agent from New York look at one of her books, and so she suggested an agent look at mine, and the agent did, and she said, well, I think you need to add about 100 more pages, to have it the length we'd like. And also, instead of having them be Louisiana Indians, why don't you have them in the plains hunting buffalo? And I realized, I said, let me have the manuscript back.
Let me stop you before you talk a little bit about the structure of the book. Could you tell us a little bit about that voice of the character that you developed there?
Yeah, it's, well, as I say, I grew up in southern Arkansas, and we would go down into northern Louisiana, my dad and I, my brother, and sometimes my mother. My dad knew Louisiana Indians. And so they're the Ofo people are, now they're called Tunica Biloxi. They're about 200 miles south of where I grew up. Mm-hmm. And I just was hearing people talk all my teen years. And so I try to use that for the voice of Thomas Darko, my main character.
Mm-hmm. There again, I think that's another one of those places that people don't think about there being a lot of Indian people around. Mm-hmm. But, and too, of course, the title of your book is The Last of the Ofos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The last actual Ofo, or particularly last speaker of the language, died in 1915. And as I say in the preface of my book, I said, but I call on an Ofo of my imagination, Thomas Darko, who will tell his story, and he does for about 114 pages, and he dies in 1997. But he and his family members that are still around up through the 20th century are being called Tunica Biloxi, the two tribes there. And so the Ofo identity merged into those two tribes by the mid-20th century.
I see.
But my character was the last speaker of the language, even though the real one died in 1915.
Mm-hmm. I see. Well, one of the things that Thomas does in the book is travel around a little bit, and tell us a little bit about some of the folks he meets, for instance.
Well, he's in Oklahoma. No, I'm sorry, in North Texas, and he runs into Bonnie and Clyde. And has an episode with them, and he runs into two of Al Capone's cohorts in Chicago, when he's involved in whiskey running. And I know a little bit about that. I had a uncle who was a whiskey maker. In
I thought you were
Arkansas.
going to say maybe you were doing a little
No,
bootlegging.
I didn't do that myself.
Oh, okay.
But no, this would be the 20s and 30s that was
Uh-huh.
going. That's when Thomas was young.
Yeah.
But then later on, he is in Los Angeles and he meets Jim Thorpe.
Mm-hmm.
And then a little later on, he meets a young Pueblo guy in Washington, D.C. And they said, well, Indians are everywhere. And that Indian guy is my friend then and still is, Simon Ortiz,
Uh-huh.
Pueblo Indian poet.
That was the line that I was thinking of, about Indians kind of being everywhere, even if they're a little bit under the radar sometimes.
Yeah, that's Simon's phrase.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And he let me use it. He was the first person to read the manuscript after I finished it. And I said, now, if you don't like the character here that you'll run across, I didn't tell him what it was.
Yeah.
I said, I'll change it. And I figured, maybe in a couple of years he'd let me know. But in a week, he got back in touch with me. He says, I like it, I like it. Said, don't change a thing. Yeah, so
Yeah, good.
we kept it in there.
All right. Yeah, I wouldn't mind if Simon Ortiz told me that I'd done something right. That'd go over good with me, too.
Yeah, and I make it a positive creation.
Yes. Well, you started to talk, before I interrupted you, a little bit about the length of the novel. Could you tell us your ideas about length and writing?
So I went from about a 15, 20-page short story, to I was getting close to about 80 pages, and that's when the agent said add some episodes, and I did close to about 170 to 200 pages. It was mostly longhand at that point. And that's when she mentioned about the Plains Indian thing. And I said, let me have it back. And when I got it back, then I cut it down. I threw out all the new stuff because it was just repetitive episodes, I felt. And I cut it down to, 100, 110, 114 pages, and that's what the book became. I'd been thinking, and I'd write about this in the introduction to my book of stories, The Plain of Jars and other stories, that I became enamored with the idea of the short novel. I don't like novelette or novella as a term, but I like the short novel that Henry James wrote, and Hemingway sometimes, and Catherine Ann Porter, and so I specifically made the book into a short novel.
What attracts you about that form?
Well, it's you can center in on one particular character, and with a great number of episodes, not a great number, but with a few episodes that are indicative of what the changes that he or she goes through, and you don't have to deal with a lot of extraneous character development. Not that I'm opposed to that, I think that's great, but for that purpose, it's just this one character. It's a character study, and I think that's what Henry James does in some of his short novels, or Stephen Crane, people, The Open Boat, things like that. So.